Welcome to the Work to Live podcast. I'm Mike DiNatale. The following is a conversation with Armel Talla, a rising senior at the University of Texas at Austin and a co-founder of the Austin-based startup ClipsAI. In this conversation, we explore the genesis of ClipsAI, how Armel balances founding a startup while being a full-time student, and Armel's long-term approach to work-life balance. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. That's the best way you could support. Without further ado, here is Armel Talla. Since we first connected, I've been looking forward to this conversation because I think you bring a couple of different perspectives in terms of being someone who's Gen Z, being a student, and also being an entrepreneur. So again, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
Sure. So I want to start by recognizing that this is obviously not your first time on a podcast. I know you have a podcast of your own. What is your podcast?
So my podcast is the Adapt or Die podcast. And so what we focus on is really reading nonfiction books, like primarily like self-help, philosophy, different things like that, and just talking about the best ideas on there. And the reason it started was because me and my best friend, also one of our co-founders for, we'll eventually talk about ClipsAI, my co-founder, we started the pod because we just really are passionate about lifelong learning. And like, we wanted a way where it was like, we would be forced to kind of learn new things all the time. And the best way to kind of learn something and really know that you're learning it is if you are able to kind of teach it and explain it. And so we're kind of looked at it as like, all right, let's try to do that and let's learn topics because we really care about just like always getting better, always learning. But we realized like we don't have credibility on anything. Like, why would anyone listen to us come and talk about? So it was like, we've been on this earth for less than 20 years when we started it. So we were like, okay, we should probably read some books. It's probably a good thing to read books. And so, yeah, over time, it started with us just like researching and then coming and talking about what we've researched. But then we just kind of thought that a book was already made to kind of take that information and put it into one coherent like subject or thing to talk about. So we just decided that reading books was the best format. And eventually in the future, we hope that we can like interview the authors that write the books and talk to them about their ideas. But yeah, it's just primarily, it's a podcast that's built on the foundation of lifelong learning.
And did you start this when you're in high school, if I remember that correctly, or is this a college project?
So I started it in high school myself. I actually, because what it was first was like, it was about self-help, but it was kind of through the lens of just like talking to other people, because I really was interested in, still am, of just like people are really interesting of all walks of life. Like even if you have no tangential thing of like what you guys do, I feel like you can always learn so much from people's experiences. So I had on people that like this one girl in my high school that she went from like being anorexic to being like a bodybuilding champion, and then just a bunch of other people. I think one time I had this kid, he had 2 kids by the time he was a senior in high school. So that was an interesting episode. So there's a lot of interesting people, but then eventually it became a thing where sourcing guests was really difficult. So we went to that format of, all right, let's just like, Ben and I will just talk about the best ideas in the book. So I think that's why having a co-host is kind of nice.
How did you learn to first start interviewing people and with the equipment and podcasting when you were in high school? How did you first start picking up those skills?
I would say it's my generation of just like growing up watching YouTube all the time. Like I don't even watch Netflix in my life right now. I literally watch YouTube, and I've been like that since high school. And it's just doing. It's just like would see people do it and being like, okay, like I've watched enough videos of like a podcast, someone being interviewed, that I was just like, let me just try. And I think I'm a pretty good conversationalist. So I really try to approach my podcast as just like talking to that person and not really less of like an interview with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think that's something that does stand out to me, exactly what you're saying with your generation. Just the availability of information is just so incredible. I mean, YouTube existed when I was growing up. It came out in 2004. But in terms of learning how to do things and the availability of resources and people putting out quality content, it's incredible, And so you really can learn so many different things from life skills, business skills, or just fun little hacks. It really is incredible. So it's cool that you harness that. And so I think it's also interesting to think about, because you grew up in that environment, younger people, I think, have this sense of so much more is possible compared to older people who have, a more narrow view of the world. And, I'm not even that much older than you, but even people older, and I think we're starting to see that manifest in so many different ways and people redefining what's possible. Would you say that's been the case, or that's your sentiment among people your age? They just think that a lot more things are possible?
100%. I mean, like, it's just, if you live in a world where you never knew of like, you could make money doing X and that didn't involve a college degree, and it was significantly more money than if you did study something that it kind of, in the sense is like, there was just like, we started to be exposed to all the options that are out in the world that you would have to have known someone that was going through it. And not everyone has the opportunity to know people that have tried a bunch of different things. So it 100% kind of opened up a lot of people eyes on just like, oh, I don't need to go to college, or I don't need to do X. I'm a big proponent of going to college. I think it's still super important if you like know what you want to study and you're studying the right things. But I think it definitely did open up a lot. And almost everything I know outside of like my technical skills comes from just like YouTube and content.
Why are you a big component of going to college? Did you know what you wanted to do when you were getting to the point of going to college?
Yeah, I have such a weird perspective because like, I just started thinking about things early. Like, I was just super lucky to start thinking about things early, but that was primarily because when I was in high school, I kind of had like this existential crisis of like, up until my junior year of high school, I thought I was going to go to MBA. Sophomore year, I slowly started to realize that that's probably not going to happen. And junior year was like, it's time to kind of wrap up. It's time to wrap up this dream and start thinking of a career. And so like, I never even thought of like, it wasn't like, oh, I want to be a doctor. It was just like, up until that point, it was really, I'm going to go to MBA. Like, that was it. There was not even a plan B.
Did your parents support that dream? Or?
Yeah, they did. And so like, I was pretty good. I was decently good. I think there's a lot of things that play into why I didn't. But now it was like, so as like junior year, where it was like restart. It's like kind of like taking like your whole life plan and you had no A or B, and then you're like, okay, restart. So I was like, all right, well, what can I do? And then for my dad, like I helped him start he started a small business, where a grocery store. So kind of seeing him doing that. And then I also started taking computer science classes in high school. I've always been a math person, like really enjoyed math. My brain just kind of wired that way. But then like I took a computer science class because I was trying to avoid taking physics. It was funny. I was like, hey, this says computer science. Will it count as a science credit? They're like, yeah, I will. Add it to my degree. And later on they say, or the courses I was taking when I was registering, they say, oh, no, that's actually not going to count for a science. You still have to take physics. It's a math course. And I was like, whatever. At the time, in high school, a lot of students take like AP courses, like, courses to really boost up your, GPA, so that you can get into college and look good. So it was essentially an AP course. And I was like, okay, whatever, an extra AP course. I was kind of a try-hard in high school. So I was like, all right, cool, I'll do it. But I ended up falling in love with it. But I fell in love with the ability to create something. It was like, I got to make a game. And it blew my mind that I was like, I made that. Like, I made that game that I'm playing on my computer right now. And it was super simple. It was called like Scratch. It wasn't even real code. It was just like you would drag and drop coding blocks, like literally blocks, to kind of piece them together to make the game. And so I just watched a tutorial, made that, ended up being pretty good at it, and was like, okay, I'm going to do that in high school. And then I just kind of quit Google, like, how much did I get paid? And it was like 6 figures. And I was like, 6 figures, 4 years? Perfect. So yeah, I'm a big proponent in the sense that like, I view college as an investment. I think viewing it through that lens makes the decision to go to college a lot easier, in my opinion. In the sense that like, if you know you're going to study something that's going to give you a return, and like, I can reasonably pay for this with 2 to 3 years outside of school and still be, live a pretty comfortable life, then that's the right investment to make. And so I think looking at it through that lens, I support college and going to school if you can justify the return on investment, right? So that's kind of like the big reason why.
Do you know people or have friends who chose to not go to college and just work on things on their own?
Yeah, so I actually going into so I've been a very entrepreneurial person. I kind of realized that as I look back, like the startup isn't the first thing that I've done, but so one of my best friends, he ended up not going to college, and he just was practically like really big into fashion, really kind of big into like the gaming scene and stuff like that. And I was also interested in like just being able to take my podcast, the Adapt or Die podcast, and finding a way to monetize it. At the early stages, I'm not that interested in monetizing the podcast. It's more for fun at this point. But when I was starting, I was like, okay, what are ways that I can monetize? And I was like, having some type of brand or clothes to sell associated with it, if the podcast does well, is one way to monetize. So we actually ended up working on that clothing brand together. Things slowed down because of my classes, and I started focusing more on like software business. But in general, like he's starting that company back up. So he's like trying to find people to also help on the business side. So I've had friends that don't go to college. I have friends that do. And in general, I think that the ones that go to college and aren't doing something they even mildly enjoy, they definitely like see no purpose in it. And compared to like my friends that don't go to college, but they are busting their ass to like figure out what they like, or they're doing something close to what they're like, and they might not be getting a comfortable 6-figure job afterwards, but they enjoy what they're doing. So it's like it's not like one is better than the other. It's just like what makes sense.
It's crazy because, even 10 years ago when I was in college, there was nobody who was going to high school and who was a good student who was even considering not going to college. It didn't seem feasible. It's like you knew you couldn't get a job without a college degree, but now there's more opportunities. I think it's so exciting, and I think even for people who are my age or older who are already in careers, I think that also there's opportunities there to take advantage of those same free resources. Maybe you got to do it differently because you're not still living at home with mom and dad and you still have expenses, but you can still capitalize on a lot of the resources that are out there. I wanted to circle back to the podcast because the podcast, from what previous conversations we had, the podcast led to the idea, which led to your current startup. So what was that process? What happened with the podcast that led to your current startup?
Yes, we really wanted to get more people our age on the lifelong learning train. It was just kind of like, well, it's like, why are we doing this? And my co-founder, Ben, like he's very big on impact. He's like, if I'm going to he's like, my existence is to help people. Like I exist on this planet to really help people, right? It's like, if I think of it through that lens, life is a lot more meaningful to him. And generally I agree. And I am kind of on the same sentiment there. So we were just kind of thinking like, well, one, we're doing this for the benefit of ourselves to learn. But two, we want more people to learn these lessons because it's so crazy. When I started doing it and I started reading more, people would ask me questions that I could easily kind of answer. Not that I know anything, but I could easily reference a book and say, oh, well, I read a book that talked about this and it seemed very helpful. They're like, oh, wow, that actually is a helpful idea. So it was like, okay, well, the information is there. It's packaged up in these books, but like, no one is really reading at our age, or like no one's getting this information as easily. So it's like, let's post on TikTok. And so it was like, all right, well, let's take our podcast and repurpose them into clips. Because I seen an account that was doing it and they had 1 million followers just posting clips of their podcast. And so it was like, okay, well, it works for them. Subjects and topics you're talking about are different depending, what you post. But it was like, it's at least going to yield us something. Maybe we don't get to 1 million followers, but 100,000, that'd be great. And so Ben started the way we split up the work was Ben was the one responsible for creating the clips. Like he would sit down, watch the videos, segment them, do the editing. Then I was responsible for taking the clips he would give to me, then posting them on all different platforms. And we were recording at one point 2 podcasts a week, and we wanted to create 14 clips from each one. He was pumping out 28 clips a week. Like
wow,
a week.
A real MVP.
He was a real MVP, but he really hated it. Like every time we would come in and record, he would tell us like, "Hey, dude, this is just annoying." And it was like freshman year. This was COVID. We were in the middle of like COVID during our freshman year, so like school was like kind of a joke. I'm not gonna lie. And so it was like, all right, like it was kind of manageable. Then we got to our sophomore year. Sophomore year, one is just harder. No more COVID. You're more in-person classes. Difficulty just started picking up, and school became a much bigger commitment. And it was to the point, it was so frustrating for him that he was like, well, like, dude, let's try to pay someone to do this. Because, again, we care about the podcast a lot, and we want to keep doing it for the rest of our lives. But it was just like, we just don't have the time to commit to it. So, and we still want to post to TikTok because we were actually seeing that whenever we did post, it was driving people back to our main page and actually converting some. And so it was like, okay, well, let's try paying an editor. then we tried finding an editor to pay to edit the clips, like literally just create the clips, not do anything else to the podcast. And they were like, yeah, we offered them $400. So Ben and I looked at each other. We're like, all right, how much money do you have? It was like, I got like 300. It's like, I got like 400. Okay, let's split it up 200, 200. Let's pay the person $400. This is probably going to cost a lot. Yeah, we definitely undershot how expensive it would be. So we went to the editor, asked them to create the clips, and they said, no, like just sitting, if all you want me to do is create the clips, like that's really boring and mundane. Like, I don't think I can even do that. They want to do the more creative, the fun part of editing. And yeah, so that's kind of like the issue that we ran into when we were like recording the podcast, and it gave birth to our current startup, ClipsAI.
So how did you go from encountering this problem where it's like, hey, this is a pain in the ass, I don't want to do it, we can't even pay someone to do it because it's that much of a pain in the ass. How did you go from, okay, let's see if we could just create some way to automate this? How did you go from that to thinking, okay, maybe other people would benefit from this as well? Like, when you encounter a problem, it's one thing where you could solve it for yourself. It's another thing whether there's a viable business opportunity out of solving it for other people as well. That's where people talk about validating a business idea. Mm-hmm. Did you think about validating the business idea in any way, or testing it, or talking to other people about it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So when we originally, kind of like the issue started around the second semester of our freshman year, and then the first semester of our sophomore year is when this became more of a business, when we kind of like started to realize like it'd be more of a business. So that freshman year, I had the idea. Because I started learning about AI just like on my free time, and I was just like very curious. I thought it was super cool, super powerful stuff. And I was like, oh well, I just told Ben on like when we would meet sometimes when we would go record, like, dude, like, just throw some AI on the problem, call it a day. Like it's that easy. Yeah. Just throw some. It's like, dude, just feed into the AI. And the AI will figure it out. And we were just like, it can't be that hard. And I always say that. And I mean, I had zero, like on a conceptual level, I like high level understood. You feed data into an AI, and then the AI will figure out how to like, reproduce it. That's all I understood my freshman year. And so that being naive was a good thing, because we would have never started if I wasn't so naive. But so first it was kind of just like, that would be a cool side project, because we're engineers, we're computer science and like, engineering majors. So it was like, we just want to like build stuff that, that'd be helpful. It was like, okay, a project to put on my resume for classes and stuff. It wasn't until trying to go pay an editor, and when we realized that if you're not going to pay someone $400 a month to do it, then it's like, dude, like other people have to be having this problem. And I've always wanted to start a startup. Well, as soon as I got to college, because I realized kind of the side story on like my whole like life crisis of realizing I didn't want to play basketball. What I came to a conclusion was that I really got into personal finance and just kind of figuring out a way to reach financial freedom, that I knew that like something about starting a business was going to be like what I do with my life. But then freshman year, once I got to UT has like a pretty vibrant startup ecosystem, that I learned that like, oh, I can combine my major with business, and it's like an amazing business, right? If you can make it to work. So I kind of knew like, okay, I want to start a startup. I don't know what it's going to be, but I want to start that. And then whenever we tried to pay the editor and they rejected the offer, that's when it was like, dude, this could be a startup. And then so the actual validation, we didn't start validating it until our second semester, sophomore year. So that's when we started to actually talking to other users that were having this problem and figuring out if it was big enough.
I think that's such an important point, is that you were taking action, you were doing something, because I think, and even I've encountered this myself at various points in my career, where I've wanted to figure out something to do next. And at times I didn't know where to go, but I just started doing something. And a lot of times I was just spinning my wheels, but it led to one thing or the other. And I think there's so much power in just doing something, and then because it generates a data point, and now you could evaluate that and you could iterate from that. And I think from that is where you could apply business skills and look through things through a business lens to see if there's potential opportunities there. But you don't get that information without trying. And so I think there's so much power in just doing things. And you like you said, you weren't starting it as a business. This was just a project. It was a hobby, something you enjoyed doing. Yeah. But from that, you led up to seeing a potential business opportunity here. So since that point in time, what has been the development of ClipsAI?
Yeah. So we officially started February 2022, and that day was we brought on our other co-founder. His name is Vedant, and we all met playing basketball our freshman year. And Ben and I, we became really close early on because we were just like really obsessed about the lifelong learning, and that's how the podcast started. But really got close with Vedant through our freshman and sophomore year because we ended up playing in the same IM basketball team, and we would hang out, and he was the one that I would pour all my business ideas onto and he would like listen. And so always known he was a very entrepreneurial, like a founder type. And so we brought him on to help us out because it was like Ben and I on the engineering side and then Vedant to handle the sales and marketing. And so from that point, we just started talking to people. So the development was February, we got together, and then we just started sourcing out potential podcasters. So we're reaching out. And so from February to about September, we had done about 30 interviews, just like sitting down, reached out, said, hey, like, we know you're in the space of podcasting, content creation. We building something that might be helpful for you. We would love to talk to try to understand what problems you have with it. And so we were just like, we weren't telling people what we were doing exactly because we didn't want to bias their answers or how. We were just really focused on exploring like that problem space of like, what are they actually dealing with? Almost every single person we talked to either already faced a problem of like repurposing, or they didn't face it and they knew they would have to because they like understood that was like the best way for them to grow, and they were avoiding it because they knew how time consuming it was going to be. So it was like 28 out of the 30 people were telling us that. And we were like, okay, this is pretty strong. Like if you hear from 28 people over and over again without us even having to prompt them or specifically ask about it, then it's like, it's pretty sure. So at that point I was like, okay, well, August we're like, all right, let's get up a landing page and let's get a wait list going. So, we just hacked up a landing page, put that out, got the ClipsAI domain, which surprisingly, like now I look back at it, it was amazing. I got clipsai.com. It's I think it's a solid domain name. And so from September to then December, this is all 2022, we were just building. And so we started actually like writing the code, like building the algorithm. And then we got out our MVP in the December. So we launched it in like alpha, where we were just like letting people use the product for free, testing it out, giving us feedback and trying to iterate on like, okay, what do people actually want? What is possible for us to do in this time period with the resources we have? And so now our product is able to currently take a full-length like podcast or webinar or YouTube video, audio or video. We primarily focus on video right now, and automatically segment that content into different clips. So based on the topic. So we do the segmentation of the clips on like what's actually being spoken. So we're able to identify different topics, and we create the less than 1 minute clips, 1 to 3 minutes, different length of clips for the various platforms. And so it's really just helping save the user time. At least our big thought is like this can save some people time by at least not having to sit through and like identify the clips. You can go and just verify the ones you like and don't. And there's a lot of other stuff we're working on and making it even easier, save people more time, make it, where the clips are really ready to make. But yeah, big idea right now on the product side is like you can upload an hour-long podcast, and then we're able to identify like 30 to 40 different clips for you, and then you can just pick the ones you like and then download them off the platform.
Kudos to you guys for doing market research. First of all, finding 30 people, that's a pretty substantial market size or good amount of people. And also, I think what you said is so important too. You weren't preempting them with questions. Is this an issue for you? You said you went up just open-ended and you saw the very clear trend line there. So that's like textbook, fantastic way to go about it. I wanted to circle back to when you said you started writing the code. So you identified the problem. How did you develop the skills to create the code to solve that problem? Was that from your classes, your studies? Were you able to do that, or did you have to supplement that? How did you actually start to build that product? Once you figured out this is what we need, how the hell did you go about building it?
Yeah, I like this question because like we are quickly realizing how much we don't know about building software. It's kind of like that thing of like, when you don't know anything, you're like, oh, how hard can it be, right? That's why we started. And then you start to quickly learn that like, whoa, I actually don't know that much. And then you're like, I don't know anything. And then so now we're at the point where like, okay, we have a lot of things to learn to get to that point. But to actually start, so I am a computer science major. Ben, and I'm going to hype Ben up a lot for this, but like truly just really smart dude. He was a mechanical engineer up until our sophomore year. And then so over the summer is when we started kind of learning. Like he had taken some programming classes, like the basics of like how do you write code, and then there's this idea called like data structures and algorithms. Like this is a core class that all like programmers take because it just teaches you like the different ways that we store data and the different ways that you manipulate it in the algorithms to do that. So it's pretty foundational that everyone learns that. So that's all he had learned going into that summer. And he had to teach himself, if you a little bit of background of like how math intensive, not too crazy, it's pretty simple math, but like it is a lot of math involved in ML of like you have to know probability, linear algebra, and like vector calculus. He taught himself all like the core stuff you needed to know that summer. And then he ended up reading a bunch of research papers of like different ML techniques to like try to find a solution for the problem that we were trying to do of like segmenting it. And he was able to find a research paper, and then he took that research paper and then implemented it. And he just switched his major to computer engineering. He did all of that before he got into the computer engineering major. So bro only took two programming classes, the basics, and had to teach himself everything else to actually implement that. I'm so lucky to work with that dude. But me, on the other hand, what was I doing? No, but so in my classes, I was, taking a lot more programming classes than he did at the time. But I ended up just kind of I ended up taking over the front end engineering. So that's like the ones that makes the site that you interact with, the UI that you play with. And it's primarily because of just skill set wise. I'm a very like aesthetic. I care a lot about the user experience, the UI. I like it being intuitive and simple. So I just cared more about it. My classes taught me the foundational things, but I had to go and use the internet content to learn of how to do front end development, because those are things that aren't taught in school. Surprisingly, the computer science major does not teach you the skills to become a software engineer. They teach you the foundational stuff, like the basics, like the core. Like you need to know how to add before you try to do calculus, right? So they're practically teaching us the core, but all the other stuff that you actually do in software engineering, like you have to learn that on your own. Even when you go start working, you end up learning your company's tech stack. But the idea is that if you know the core programming concepts, then learning different tools to build is not as difficult. And so I had to teach myself like all the front end stuff, and I just told you, Ben had to teach himself all the things with machine learning. And we learned a lot over that time period, but we were starting to realize that there's a lot more to learn. So, yeah.
Given how much you guys have learned on your own, Ben, and you as well, and even just the example you're just talking about, where they teach you the foundations in school, with the future of education, do you think that trend like continues to make, even as you were saying before, computer science is a good ROI because you could get a high-paying job, but do you think, just the more and more openly available that information becomes, does that make education even more obsolete going forward?
I like a university and going to study.
Yeah, even for things that are high ROI, like computer science.
Yeah, so what I will say is I think the structure, like all the information to learn anything is online, 100%. And you have to have the thing is, but you have to have the motivation. And you have to have the motivation to be disciplined as well. Ben is very disciplined. He's just like, he's the core of our, how we think about execution. Like we base our philosophy around really him. But so unless you have that really just innate drive and discipline and really just learn that thing. And everyone has a different subject that they're really interested in learning. But a lot of it's for technical things, for very, very technical things that can help you give you that skill set to have a good job. And it's, just a good skill set to know of computer and programming. I say school still has a benefit because it forces structure. It forces that accountability. It forces you to really even when you don't feel like doing that programming assignment, which trust me, not all the time I'm like in the mood to do them. But you have a grade due, you have like, you paid for it, and at least I know that I'll get a return. So I don't know. It's a great question. I think that like the information's out there, but not everyone has the discipline to learn it themselves. And that's where school comes in, is it provides structure. And another thing that's really helpful is because there's so much information on the internet, it can take you a long time to get a question answered if you get stuck on something. So, you might sit down and you might be willing to sit down and read a textbook about something and like actually go through it, but you might be confused on an idea. You won't have a TA, you won't have a professor to ask. So that's kind of like the benefit of school, is like the access to experts to answer those questions for you is also there. But that really only holds for like a few type of, I think, things that you can learn that are like really difficult to get answers for. But who knows, maybe the internet becomes so even more and more easy to like reach experts that you can actually get someone to answer your question a lot easier, not just like posting. There's already forms you can do that, where you can post a question on, like, they call it like Stack Overflow or Math Exchange, and someone will eventually answer. But I guess the simple thing to your question is like, yes, it makes education more obsolete, but I don't think it'll ever go away, because that structure and that environment of being around other people that are there to just learn is just so like, is so important.
You're a computer science major, which from my understanding is a pretty difficult major, pretty time consuming. You're also working on the startup. How do you juggle doing both?
Yeah, I'm also a double major in math. Just I don't love myself. No, I do. I really, like I mentioned, I really like math. Yeah, like, I mean, nowadays my courses are like, I take 4 courses, and it's like 2 computer science and 2 math courses. And then it's just like back to back, just like getting slammed. Balance. Yeah, I think like it's a lot of sacrifice that I've had to make, in the sense of like, what do I really care about? What do I really enjoy doing? I had to ask myself that like my sophomore year, whenever we started to, whenever we were like, okay, we're going to take this serious. And it was kind of like, it was the first time I was like, what do I enjoy doing? Like, what's actually interesting to me? Like, do I enjoy going out to the bar where it's like really loud and like you can't really talk to anyone? Like, the way I'm describing it, you can tell I don't. And it was because like I had never really been that person. Like, I've always kind of been like much more interested in just like sitting with like a smaller group of friends and just being able to talk about all the crazy things that we can, like, whether aliens are going to come or something really deep or just something funny. Like, I was just more of like I just like a smaller group of people being together and hanging out. But I was like a very intellectually curious, like I really like the whole reading aspects of like philosophy, economics, and all that different stuff, that it just kind of became apparent to me that like, if all I had to do was just learn and then be with my co-founders and talk about this startup, and we were all also interested in the same like kind of intellectual things outside of just the company, that's fine with me. Like, I'm with those few people that we can just have really great conversations. So I had to sacrifice a lot of like the going out on Saturdays to different like, oh, let's go to 6th Street, let's go to this frat party, like cut that off. Was like, I don't even enjoy it. So it took, but there was FOMO, definitely, in the sense of like, oh, everyone's going, like, should I, so that was one aspect of it, of like cutting out the social life that was kind of driven by FOMO and not really driven by what I care about. The other aspect of it is just like getting really good at managing my time. I mean, like, so now like I plan out my weeks on the Google Calendar, like have like almost every minute of my day is like, I know what I should be doing. I don't follow my calendar perfectly, but it gives me a rough idea and helps me like take away the whole like having to think about what should I be doing right now. It's like, no, I already know I should just be doing. So trying to remove a lot of, this is really dumb, like decisions that need to be made to take get my focus back. Like, if you can see right now, like I just wear like black t-shirts and like black sweatpants like almost every single day, unless I'm going somewhere actually. So yeah, that's a lot of it. A big thing is just sacrifices, making a lot of sacrifices.
I think that's a great point, what you're saying. It's I don't think it's trivial at all, like making the decisions ahead of time so you don't have to in the moment, because it does slow you down in the moment. And I'm a big proponent of scheduling, and I use Google Calendar calendar as well. One thing, again, you want to talk about things that seem so stupid that has worked so well for me, has been color coordinating things on my calendar. It's like, okay, when I exercise, that's like a yellow color. And when I'm doing work, that's orange, and something social is green. And so when I plan out my week, at a glance, I could just see, okay, am I spending enough time working? Am I spending enough time exercising? I could digest it so much quicker, whereas previously I had everything all just in the standard blue that it comes on Google. And it's like I would have to really stop and read everything to get a sense of what my week looked like. But by changing the colors, not only has it made it more useful, but I just enjoy using it so much more. It's like some stupid dopamine hit I get by seeing the nice colors, and and then at the end of the week, I look back and I'm like, okay, shit, I didn't spend enough time doing something that I want to do. I said I want to, go to 2 social events. I could quickly see I didn't. Or I said I want to work, 10 hours a day, and whatever. So again, sometimes those things that are so trivial, but they really do have such outsized impacts. So I think that's, I don't think that's trivial at all.
I want to ask you, kind of flip the interview. Like, what has kind of been like the evolution of how you've thought about work from like your 20s, like when you're in college, to now? You just said you just crossed your 30s. One, you look great for 30. But just crossing your 30s, like what's kind of been the evolution of how you've seen like how much you care about the work you do, and like balancing the social life aspect of it and all the different stuff?
I think it starts in college. I was in a fraternity in college, and it very much was a work hard, play hard atmosphere. So I was fortunate to be around people who in college who worked really hard, and to this day, some of the people I went to college with are very successful, but we also really partook in partying a lot and having a lot of fun. So it was just like during the week, heads down studying, but it's like when it was time to release and have fun, we did that. So we took school very seriously and worked very seriously, despite also engaging in the social element as well. And for me, when I decided to study in actuarial science, it was a very pragmatic choice, because my school, UConn, we won the national championship. UConn has a really great program, like top 10 in the country, or at least they did when I was there, for actuarial science. And so, I was good at math. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was like, oh, this is like math and business. That sounds kind of fun. And it's a good paying career. You take tests, you get raises every time you pass a test. Again, very practical choice. So I did it, and I went through school, and I thought the material was somewhat interesting, but I was just focused on getting good grades and trying to get a good job. So I didn't think about what the nature of my work was going to look like upon graduating. Lo and behold, when I did graduate and I got my first job, and I had my job lined up before Thanksgiving break in my senior year. So it was great, because then the rest of the senior year, I was coasting. I was chilling.
You're like, everything's confirmed.
Exactly, yeah. But I'm not even joking, and I have like a journal entry to verify this. Within 4 weeks of my first job, I was like, man, this sucks. I was living in Brooklyn. I was commuting to New Jersey, so I had like a 45 to an hour drive, sitting in traffic, and then I was going to sit in a cubicle, and I didn't even have access to the drives that I needed for the first 3 weeks on the job. So the first 3 weeks on the job, I couldn't even do any work yet, but I couldn't just go home. I had to sit there and pretend to be busy, and I came in with so much drive and ambition that I wanted to put my best foot forward and climb up and make an impact. And I very quickly realized that's not how this works. Like, you're at the bottom of the totem pole. People don't necessarily care about you. And maybe that was the company that I was in, or that specific office, but I very quickly realized that, shit, man, I don't want to do this. Maybe I could handle the office life if I'm doing work that I find interesting. But first of all, I don't have any work to do yet. Second of all, what I am starting to do is like painfully boring. And also, actuaries are not known for being the most social type of people. There's so many stupid jokes about how actuaries are like antisocial and introverted. And so most of the day was spent sitting alone in my cubicle, barely interacting with people. I was like, man, I can't do this for 40 more years. The evolution, I'm being a little long-winded now, but I guess the evolution is just getting to the point where I realized I want to do work that I care about, or if I have to do a job that I don't care about, I don't want it to overwhelm my time, so I can still work on things that I care about. I want to have some kind of a positive impact in the world. What's better than that, than doing something that actually matters, rather than just something that is just a cog in the wheel. And that's a journey that I'm still on. That's part of the genesis for this project as well, is trying to have a positive impact, talking about things that are near and dear to my heart, that are important to me, that I know are important to other people as well, and trying to just, help other people in a way that I know I've struggled with as well.
Yeah. So the evolution was kind of just in the beginning stages, you were just so focused on just getting the good job. But then as you get into that reality, it slowly became, well, actually, what can I do that's actually meaningful for
Yeah.
yourself? And I think a lot of, I think that is the journey I feel like most people, at least like my peers, are kind of going through. Where like when I talk to them, I sound crazy when I tell them like it's like, oh yeah, so where you gonna work? You know, like you're gonna work at Google, right? And I'm like, no, I'm gonna do my startup full time. And they're just like, no, but like, what are you actually gonna do? And it's like, no, I'm like, this is what I want to do. And they're just like, oh, well, you know, kind of following the typical path until you kind of have that realization. I think an internship is so valuable because I feel like it gives a hint of that, of like, especially if you, because I mean, one, they make it really fun for the interns. Like they kind of hide the reality of it as much as they can, and you're only there for 3 months. But I would talk to people on a much deeper level, like the ones that were working, like, oh, how do you like it so far? You know, what are your motivations? What do you, and I kind of just saw that when I would talk to the different, really smart people at Google, it was like, you know, they either had like kids and stuff, so they were just like, you know, I'm here, you know, to take care of my kids, you know, and the work is cool and stuff like that. But then there's others that were younger that just, it didn't seem like they had like that same drive to want to start something. And then I did find one person I was like had that drive, but it was like they're like, well, what? Like I don't even know where to start. So it's interesting. It's interesting as I talk to people about how they see their work. It does change.
Yeah, and I think what I've realized too is that everybody's different. You know, some people like to just go put in their hours, come home, and get all of their fulfillment and joy outside of work. And if that's you, that's fine.
Yeah.
More power to you. I'm just not wired that way. It seems like you're not either, you know? And so I don't think it's, you know, it would make sense for us to try and fit into that box. You know, when I was working corporate jobs, the analogy I always used is like I felt like a square peg trying to fit into a round hole. It just wasn't a fit. I was literally going to work and felt like I was acting. You know, I would talk in a way that I wouldn't ordinarily talk, and you know, and not an unprofessional, but just the culture wasn't a match, you know? And so with more and more opportunities, more and more information being out there, like we were talking about earlier, why not try and do something? You know, even if the things that I work on fail, and I think this is something that prevents a lot of people, because I have these conversations with a lot of friends as well, and a lot of people are always like so scared to get started. And even I remember when I left my first job, when I was leaving my careers in actuary, I remember this guy in the office who was like a year or two younger than me said something like, "Oh, you're so brave, man." And I'm like, I'm just like taking off a shirt that's burning. You know, this doesn't feel brave to me. It just feels like common sense. Like if you're miserable, why would I continue to stay? You know, and I think the important thing is that the possibilities to do new things are more possible now than ever before. You know, and so if you do feel that urge, you know, I think you got to go for it.
You have to. Have to.
I want to end by talking about something else that I think is different among us, my generation, your generation, millennial, Gen Z versus older generations, and that's the concept of work-life balance. You know, because like we were saying, I think previous generations' work was just a place where you went, put in your hours, rolled up your sleeves, you know, and that's where you got your paycheck. And nowadays, people are asking for more and more out of the work. We want fulfillment. We want, you know, enjoyment, you know, and that muddies the waters between what's work and what's not work. And so for yourself, you know, where you're at the cusp of your career, you know, you want to start a company. How are you thinking about what kind of balance you would like to strike between work and life?
So it's funny. I was actually talking to someone like just before I came here about work life because they're graduating this year. I think the notion of work life balance it kind of it leans towards this idea that work cannot be your life, and it's kind of it because I have two ideas on this. This is so the first one of like this idea that when we say work life balance, this is pushing that you cannot have work be your life. And as like if you're starting a company or a startup, like any project that you do that you really care about, it becomes your life. Like at this point, I like my thoughts are just like all about like Clips AI. Like either like what's going on, like what can I do to
Dreaming
become
about it.
better, like literally dreaming about like waking up with solutions of like I had this problem yesterday, I woke up this morning and I have a solution to the problem. It's just like consumed everything, but that's like it's a part of the obsession of like if I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna do something to be the best at it and be like the best in the world. Like that's what I try to aim for, and that's like what we try to hire for. And so but I think like it's like you said, it's that it depends on the person you are. If you're a type of person that like you if you get into something and you find work that you find to just be like super meaningful and enjoyable, and like you are just the type that wants to pour all your energy into it, like work life balance is like it's just a bad term. It's just like balance. Like, do you just feel like you find fulfillment in it all, but also make sure that, you know, you're taking care of your health and you're also taking care of like the people that matter in your life and like you're still being there for them. Because you can do all three of those things, but you have to sacrifice all the other stuff that does not matter to it. So that's the one aspect of it. I also think work-life balance I think the idea that most people think of work-life balance is kind of short-term, in my opinion, in the sense that, oh, I do my 8 hours and then I have the rest of the day to do what I want. I look at it very differently because if you kind of go with that approach, if I do my 8 hours and I, you know, get to do whatever I want for the rest of the day, you're going to be doing that same thing for 60 years if you're trying to like retire and just, so if you're just keeping the typical 9 to 5, you're going to do that for 60 years or whatever. But if you think of it from a long-term perspective of like, and I'm fortunate enough to have started earlier thinking about this at like just 20 is like, hey, if I just bust my ass for the first 10 years, the first 5 to 10 years of my life and just like work really, really hard, save up money, or just like take big risk that could lead to a big outcome, then I can have the rest of my life to do something different. Like I can start to choose how I want to live or choose what I work on. So my days aren't always the same. My years aren't always the same. My decades aren't the same. I have more optionality in the future, but it's like, so in this early stage, it's just work. And I don't have kids. I don't have bills. I don't have responsibilities. I just have a debt to pay off and I'll be able to pay it off. And so it's like, yeah, like why not look at it that way? So I have kind of two perspectives that I guess they go hand in hand. Like in my 20s, like work is my life. But I bet like once I have kids, there will be a different separation of like, there's my life of family life, but there's also my life of work that is still meaningful.
It's like a longer term view of work life. I think I mentioned when we previously spoke, I've heard someone talk about that in terms of like seasons. You know, you have different seasons in your career. The bust your ass, grind it out season, and then maybe you have a family season where you don't want to be putting in 60, 80-hour weeks anymore, and so you could pull back. So I think that is a really astute way to potentially think about it. One more thing I want to ask, actually, I'm just remembering to something earlier in the conversation, is I want to pick your brain quickly about AI, because obviously that's such a hot topic nowadays, you know, and you're familiar with AI, you know, you computer science background, you're leveraging AI in a business as well. What are your thoughts about AI in terms of potentially eliminating people's jobs, or, you know, how could people who aren't computer science majors like yourself, who aren't so close to it, how could people cultivate a potentially beneficial relationship with AI in terms of using it in their own lives or with their own businesses, if that's even possible?
Yeah, that's a great question. One at first by saying like, y'all, I'm still not an expert in anything. Spend a lot of time like researching, learning about AI. So definitely have my own opinions on it, but just want to say like I'm not an expert at it at anything. Um, I first think like understanding just really where we are with like the models and how powerful they are. I'm in the camp of like there's this term called AGI, artificial general intelligence. This is kind of like, you know, if we reach that point, it's like the singularity. It's like you have this one AI that just knows how to do everything and like everything really well. And so I think we're still far from AGI. I think you're still like 20, 30 years. And like because if you have AGI, there's the real existential threat of like, what jobs even matter? Because it's going to wipe a lot of jobs up really fast. But because we're still far enough, not like so far, like this is like AGI could happen in our lifetime, which is, it's crazy to think about. And so I think one is just like getting a better understanding of actually how like these systems work, in the sense of like Like, how do they, train these models? Like, what are they actually trying to do? Because a lot of people kind of don't know that what ChatGPT is, all it's trying to do is predict the next word. So essentially, like, sometimes, I mean, there's some arguments that people are making that these models know how to reason, in the sense like they know how to really think through problems like humans kind of do. But from like an actual like when you've built the model and you're saying like the objective or what it's outputting, it's outputting a prediction of saying, I like, this is the couple of words that came before. What is the next best word that makes sense? And can I string those together to where it makes enough sense? So when you understand it that way, you kind of realize it's like, it's not as like as crazy as it seems. It's super impressive, the fact that it just does that. It's able to like come up with, write articles, answer your questions, but they're just predicting the next word, meaning that it's like, if you are doing a job that involves, like reasoning, there's still like the creativity aspect of like having to take that idea, having to take a problem and solve it. Then these AI tools just enhance us. They increase productivity. And the example that's given by a lot of people is like farming. Like, it used to be like a more significant percentage of the United States population was just actually on farms doing farm work. Then these like tractors and all these different tools came out to where one person could do the work of 100 farmers. That's just such high leverage. And it's like, it's created so many opportunities and jobs and has made our life way better. So it's the same thing with AI, where AI is really this big, it's going to just fundamentally give us so much leverage to do the same amount of work with less people, less energy, less time, that this is going to free us up into actually being able to focus on the harder problems to solve, the more creative things to work on. So from that lens, you understand that we're very far away from the actual existential threat. So we have time to think about how we're going to deal with that from an economic point of view, and kind of like ethics point of view. But at this current stage, these tools are just like high leverage tools. So it's really having to like, one, learn more about it. Don't be scared of like the technicality of it, because you don't have to like, know it that in depth, but you just having a high level understanding and also kind of having this point of view that it's just going to make me better is really how. And in terms of specific on like what industry you're in, it really depends and varies. But I think that the mindset of how to approach it is the most important part.
I think what you're speaking to speaks very much to something that I heard recently, where somebody was saying that AI at least in the short term, AI is not going to replace your job, but somebody who knows how to use AI will. Yeah. And so it's about, like you said, staying up to date, educating yourself, and then seeing, if you could leverage it to do your own work better. I think that's how I'm thinking about it. And that's how I hope other people, at least in the short term, are thinking about it. Of course, like you said, long term, there's some deep existential, philosophical questions we have to grapple with. But like, ChatGPT is already being used by people, to do their jobs better. So it's almost as if you're not, you're going to get left behind.
Yeah, exactly. And just to kind of tie this idea into like ClipsAI, because I feel like I didn't maybe give a good explanation of what we do. Our one sentence line is, ClipsAI helps creators and businesses take long form content and automatically turn them into social media clips. That's what we focus on doing now. But when we were crafting and like trying to understand like, what is the motivation like of us doing this long term? Like, on the surface level, it just seems like, okay, great, you are taking people's content and like helping them make social media posts. Like, how meaningful, how in depth, how game changing can that be? What good are you doing for the world by making this tool? So we started to think a lot about like, why are we doing this outside of the fact that we're solving our own problem, but like, let's try to dig deeper into like, why did we even have this problem and stuff like that. And it kind of goes back to what I've mentioned throughout the podcast, is that like, one, we've been the recipient of having so much information out on the internet, right? Like, we are able to learn so much, like everything I know about startups, everything I know about programming a website, everything Ben knows about writing code with AI, we learned it all on the internet. And so we started thinking about this like, and well, why did we make the podcast? Is we wanted to share higher quality information out there so people could go learn from it as well. So it kind of tied back to this thing of like, what we think we can do with the same idea of like, these AI tools can really help us leverage and focus on what matters, is we are wanting to like improve the quality of information that's shared on the internet by kind of simplifying how we create and distribute content. And the idea here is that we think we have this second and third order effect on that, because if we can give people tools to not focus on the mundane, the repetitive task of like going to repurpose your content, editing it, then having to think about what to post, when to post it, what captions to write, all those different things. That's a part of like the content creation aspect that we think like you can have and like your own virtual assistant handle that aspect, so we can give that time back to the creator so they focus on quality. And because nowadays, since there's so much information out there, but there's also so much noise. And so the only way you as a creator will get through the noise is by making quality content. So it's like the whole idea is like, if we can equip people with the tools to focus on making quality, not only do we force there to be better information on the internet, but we also help that creator be able to cut through the noise and get their content shared on there. So we don't have like a direct impact on like the content that's being made, but we're hoping that we're able to leverage AI and help people leverage this new tech to be able to focus more on the content they're making.
I think that's so important. It's like you're drilling deeper into what your why is this. It's like, okay, we want to help people make content easier. Why? And it's like the deeper you go, not only is the more you're going to be able to resonate with potential customers in terms of solving their problem, but also in terms of just connecting with them on a human level. But I think, like you said, it really goes so much further in terms of long-term motivation, knowing deep in your core, this is what we're doing this is the tool we're putting out there. But what we're really doing is this actual much deeper thing. I think that's super important for anybody to think, at any point, whether you're starting a business or you're, in a job as well, or whatever endeavor you might take on. I think it's really important to drill down deeper and deeper to understand what your why is. I think that's all I had, Armel. Thank you so much. This was awesome. We might have to run this back at some point because I feel like so many things came up for me during this conversation that I want to dive into. But I think we covered enough for today. But like I said, thank you so much for joining me, man.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I can't wait to have next conversation, and there'll be a lot more progress on my side. I would have lived more life, so hopefully I'll be more wise.
Yeah, you got plenty of wisdom already, man.
All right, thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. That's the best way you could support.